Welcome to Video Epic Dubstep Style. Today I'm breaking down my song Transmission with Christian Hayward. I was inspired to make this song after I recreated IVORY the Fall and Calcium Blessed. I learned a lot from sound effects and sound design and stuff and applied it to this song. So let's start off with the intro. I like this intro because it's just enough for a dubstep song. Here's some claps with a volume automation. For synths and atmosphere, we have these pads. I used Quanta, a granular synthesizer, to resample like a sine wave or something really basic and make it into a pad. The MIDI is just a simple progression where I layer by an octave. And then this MIDI for the beep boop bop boop boop boop. That's just a noise layer and a synth layer. And the synth layer is my favorite preset ever, which is Raindrops by Virtual Riot. Listen to how epic it is. Also, here's a quiet respace to fill out and whatever. You can see with all these elements combined, the frequency spectrum is pretty good. In the intro, everything is filled out without being overly loud or anything. The sample is fun because it's actually just the drop basses, but I rendered them and mixed them to where it sounds like atmosphere. I like this technique for a lot of songs because it lets the listener understand the drop before it even gets there. For the build-up, the synths are copy and pasted from the intro, but the width, reverb, and low pass change over time. And for the effects, I have one white noise sample. And more interestingly, I have the best sample of all time, which is an entire build-up effect in one sample. And then the Christian Hayward vocal transmission. So I have two automations for the sidechain. One is for quick sidechain for like hi-hats and stuff, and the other is just normal sidechain. I'm automating the mix of the sidechain over time, as well as Endless Smile for reverb, and a phaser for the build-up. And then we got the classic, I don't know what to do for the kick drums over time, so let's just make them go faster. And that was the intro build-up, not drop. But here is the drop. Let's break down the drums. I think the kick is a Nasco one from an old Cymatics pack. And the snare is a volume tonal snare. Apparently it's meme-worthy and overused, but I don't care, because it sounds good. Also, to make it sound even more gooder, I have a snare tail reverb sample. These are hi-hats. These hi-hats were inspired from my recreation of Calcium Blessed. In that song, he uses the hi-hat sparingly and uses many different samples instead of one loop repeatedly playing. Background synth. And another one. Here's the wubs. Here are the layers. If you like these sounds, I made a free sample pack for you to download. Just check the description or comments below. This one was made with the RX D-click trick that I showed off in my sound design video. For this one, I used M frequency shift, and the delay was set pretty high, like at 70, and the milliseconds were pretty low, around 20 to 30. For the Serum preset, it's pretty basic. It's a saw wave, noise, EQ peaks that are LFO'd, and distortion. And the post-processing is pretty cool because I'm using some fat rack I found on Discord, and it sounds really cool compared to conventional like VR ones. I have another similar layer, but it's only for mono. There's no movement in this one, it's just for texture. And then we have the main layers that sound like this. These sounds were actually made with the same method as the other ones I've shown, with the RX8 declick trick, and just using a simple serum. And for another layer, just to add like gritty texture, we have this. You can actually see in the waveform that this was made with a saw and noise, and altogether it sounds like this. So here's how the overall sound design process went. I have a serum loaded up in this pattern. It goes into a unique mixer track with an Edison that constantly records it. I would put whatever effects I wanted to use before the Edison. So for example, I'm using a fat rack and this frequency shifter. Once I got the sound that I liked, I would stop recording, turn off the MIDI, and then drag the sample from Edison to the playlist. Once you have something resampled, it's a lot easier to work with. For example, I chopped up the volume and made this. I really like this process because once you're done, you can mute all the effects to save CPU and mute the MIDI, then later for new sounds, turn them back on and add different effects. For the web bus, I have a Valhalla room that adds reverb to the end of each bar, where it like sweeps up and adds like a fill effect. The sub is also cool because I added a pitch automation that goes up and down by 2 semitones. So for the next part, we have this, which is a variation of this. What makes this unique is that I added this plugin called M-Freeform Phase, which is like a disperser, but you can draw your own shape in it. And then to end that part, I took a glitchy sample and made it unique with my own automations and the RX thingy. Going into the next section, I added another new texture. It's just a loud feedback noise is the name of the sample. It's in my pack for you to download, and I made it by using Serum and a lot of delay and OTT. This next section is very similar to this one, except I have this machine gun bass that sounds really bad soloed, but good in the mix. In the first part of the song, I mostly use this sound, but the second time around, I add this for variation. It's basically the same sound, but processed differently. I have a compressor that makes it more transient heavy, and then another crunchy solid layer for texture. This next section is a variation on this previous part. Now this may be a bit complex for some people, so I put a vocal that says switch so people know the music is switching. Here's how I made that first sound. Yeah, that one. Serum, MIDI, saw, unison. Put the width and randomness to 0. Comb filter for texture. For the post-processing, it's a M frequency shift with a modulating shift and a delay with some feedback, and then a fat rack, and then that's it. Again, these samples are just variations of sounds I used before. I just used different automations for the frequency shift and dragged out different samples from Edison. The section after this one is basically a copy and paste of the one earlier, and then we transition into the bridge and then breakdown. The bridge is basically the intro, but with slightly different elements, and I did this by adding more layers to the main synth, so it feels more melodic and complex, and it holds the listener's attention for longer than a typical breakdown or build-up. And then we have the breakdown. So the breakdown is like a chill part to contrast with the epic dubstep. And it's basically a garage part with a bunch of like Foley and textures like wind and water. For the sounds, we got a Reese. I have like 5 different pads and stuff for atmosphere. My favorite pad is this one that I use a shaper box on, which uses a volume automation to turn it into like a pluck that sustains. Moving on to the drums, I really like them because they're garage drums, and more importantly, not dubstep drums, so the song has more variation and interest. The samples I used were from a kit called Drum Kit 2 by Direct. So after the breakdown, we have the genius dubstep move of copy and pasting the whole song and making minor changes. So here's drop 2. Aside from having a fake out, I use a new sound design technique called this sound. I made that new sound out of the original sounds and then sped them up and cut them up. Also, there's this. The rest of the drop is really just different arrangement of sounds, so I don't think it's entirely worth going over, so we'll just get to the ending. This ending is worth going over because I used 5 different impacts. However, that's not all. We also have the mastering to go over. Like a true Brostep warrior, I have OTT on my master. And no, that's not a stupid joke for the video. I'm serious. Dad, you're not right. Anyway, let's move on to the ozones. So for the EQ, I'm cutting some low mids and shelving some of the high end. For the multi-band compressor, it's mostly default settings, except I'm adjusting the compression with the input gain and not the threshold. For the imager, I increase the stereo on everything except for the sub, and the higher the frequencies, the more you can expand it. And then for the dynamic EQ, it's cutting out 3.5 kilohertz, which is really harsh and annoying. And then for the final part, we have this weird trick I learned on Nasco's stream, where he'll frequency split the bass and the rest of the frequencies, and then adjust the volume of each, and then go into a maximizer, because that way you can lower the bass so you can make it louder before the compression. And then after the final maximizer, that's it. That wraps up the video. Remember, I'm giving away some of these sounds for free that I use in the song, so if you want that mini sample pack, check the description and comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed, comment what you want to see next, and subscribe for more content like this. Catch you guys next time.